All right, moving on. The consumers may have shown patience during the early days of the pandemic as companies simplified supply chains and also streamlined their product lines and also cut customer service. But that patience seems to be wearing thin, according to PricewaterhouseCoopers' latest Global Consumer Insights Pulse survey, which surveyed 9,069 consumers across 25 territories. Joining us this morning is Southeast Asia Consumer Markets Leader Strategy and Rakesh Mani. This morning, Rakesh, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. First of all, take us through the broad trends in the latest PwC Global Consumer Insights survey. What do you think retailers should be most worried about?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me. It's really great to be on this program with all of you. I think the headline message is that consumers haven't given up on expectations of quality and choice and service. They may have shown a lot of patience during the early days of the pandemic as a lot of the things that you talked about, right? Simplifying supply chains, streamlined product lines, all evolved. But I think that patience seems to be wearing thin. And I think the winners or retailers that will fare well in this environment are those that can manage multiple disruptions at the same time and find opportunities in what seems like an era of perpetual upheaval.
As you know, there's a trend is with revenge spending, revenge going out. So will revenge spending continue in the face of inflationary pressures?
I think consumer expectations seem to be shifting quite a bit. And I think it's a bit in response to a number of different things, right? There's inflation, there's supply chain issues, there's ESG, which we've talked about quite a bit. And then there's a possible recession that we're looking at, which affects availability and competition and values, right? In Malaysia, when we asked consumers what are the greatest issues that they're facing while shopping, the answer is actually the same, whether it's in physical stores or it's online. Number one, I think they're concerned about rising prices for things like groceries. The second is unable to find products because it's not even in stock. And then the third is sort of the time it's taking for delivery, right? So my sense is that revenge spending is perhaps a bit of a stronger term, and there's more near-term pressures that they're responding to.
Yeah, Rakesh, Haris here. When does brand loyalty still matter when retailers are grappling with the effects of supply chain woes like out of stock and also long wait times?
I think it matters a lot. Right? I think how they are responding to it, right, is consumers today a lot more empowered by technology, and how they're using that is to compare across websites, across stores, across channels, across retailers to find the availability that they're looking for. And they're switching quite seamlessly across these channels to get what they want, right? So I think the challenge is for companies to be able to handle that effectively. So I mean, just to give you a stat, right, in Malaysia, about 52% of consumers said that they are looking across multiple sites to find the availability that they require. And about 44% are shopping across multiple retailers. So I think the loyalty will be there, provided they see companies and brands continuing to serve them with the products that they need in the channels that they like to buy them. So that puts a bit of an onus on brands and retailers to make sure that they are listening to what their consumers and customers are telling them and be able to respond to it quite dynamically. I think the challenge that most brands and retailers face is whether they have the data and the insights to be able to capture that view and respond to it quickly.
Rakesh, I want to focus on the environmental, social, and also governance, which is the ESG. What is your take on ESG? What does it stand in the minds of Malaysian consumers when there are a host of other concerns influencing their purchasing behavior?
Yeah. So, I think ESG is one of those topics that has been talked about a lot. I think what the survey tells us is overall about half of consumers say that they are influenced quite strongly by ESG, right? I think what has changed over the last several years that we've run this survey is that the S and G part of ESG, the social and the governance factors, seem to be a lot more of a strong influencer today than just the environmental factors when it comes to making purchase decisions. And what we mean by that is on the social side or governance side, it's commitment to human rights through your supply chain, diversity, transparency in your business practices. That's quite important, particularly with millennials and with Gen Z consumers. So in Malaysia, just to give you a data point, right? About 38% of Malaysian consumers said the environmental factors are important to them. But about 50% of consumers said social factors and governance factors are important influencers of their behavior when purchasing a product or service from a company. I think the big question and trade-off on the ESG side is that over the coming years, ESG will be both a disruptive force, but also a driver of value. And the question that I think a lot of brands are asking themselves is, if inflation continues to push up prices, will consumer commitment to ESG falter or will it stay steady? And I think the dilemma is that for those with cash in their pockets, you can afford to remain very deliberate on the ESG choices that you make. But if budgets start to tighten, where will that lead consumers?
Rakesh, besides consumers, the report also raised some interesting insight, for example, like about the Metaverse. How do you reconcile the need to evolve with the time through innovations like virtual reality and concerns around personal data?
Yeah. So, I mean, the way I interpret that is that omni-channel experiences are more important than they ever were. More than 80% of consumers that we surveyed said they shopped across at least 3 channels in the last 6 months. About 1 in 3 said they used some kind of virtual reality experience, and a lot of that ended up being in luxury and retail. So yes, I think omni-channel is going to be more and more important going forward. If there was any doubt in the minds of brands and retailers, I think that at this point should be put to rest, right? But you raise a very, very important point on the notion of trust in an omni-channel world, right? What's really striking is that about 40% of consumers do not trust companies that companies who gather their data will use it in an ethical way. And about 13% don't even trust their own employers. So that's pretty striking, right? So I think retailers who want to build more trusted relationship with consumers online and across multiple data platforms are seeing a need to invest in data and analytics to understand customer wants and needs, but also on cybersecurity and data protection to make sure that the trust element of it is conveyed and it's strong.
So what are the top 3 things that retailers need to adopt to or start thinking about? So what are some of the trade-offs?
Okay. So I think some of them we've sort of talked about already, but I'll recap them a little bit. In my mind, there's 5 things. So firstly is the notion of omni-channel. So if retailers had any doubt that they need to reach consumers across different channels, the state of supply chains today and inflation have made that imperative clear, right? So there's not a lot of time to delay your omni-channel plan. The second is ESG, and how can you position that as a driver of value to consumers by leading with some of the cues that matter to them, whether that's social or governance. We've talked about the 50% of consumers in Malaysia who say that's important to them. We've talked about the cybersecurity and the data protection agenda. I think that's particularly important in an era of more political polarization, geopolitics throwing up a lot of questions. So I think online security and privacy is front of mind for consumers and therefore should be for retailers. And the industry may need to sort of redouble its investment in the infrastructure that supports that.
Yeah.
Lastly, I would say on local supply chains and pricing, I think we're seeing a little bit more of a polarized world with supply chains becoming more near in and localized. There's a question on what that means for more international brands and businesses, and how your assortment varies and how retailers will be able to respond to that.
All right, Rakesh Mani, thank you so much for joining us this morning. That is Rakesh Mani, Southeast Asia Consumer Markets Leader for Strategy and membincangkan tentang keadaan semasa kajian PwC tentang bagaimana untuk retailers memberikan reaksi dan juga react to the disruption in the supply chain.